How did the visions of an unknown nun transform the Eucharistic devotion of the entire Church? Corpus Christi. It was born from the heart of Saint Juliana of Montcornillon and her dream of a feast dedicated exclusively to the Eucharist, confirmed by the miracle of Bolsena, instituted by Pope Urban IV, and embellished by the immortal hymns of St. Thomas Aquinas. This celebration has carried the Blessed Sacrament through the streets of the world for centuries, reminding us that in the consecrated host, heaven and earth meet in an eternal embrace. Chapter 1. Medieval Origins. The 13th century presented the Catholic Church with a period of profound contrasts and transformations. Gothic cathedrals soared towards heaven as symbols of faith, while new religious orders like the Franciscans and Dominicans revitalized spirituality with their return to evangelical poverty. Universities flourished, where figures like St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Bonaventure developed theological syntheses that would shape Christian thought for centuries. However, this spiritual springtime coexisted with serious threats to the faith. Various heresies, particularly the Cathars and Albigensians, challenged fundamental doctrines. Especially concerning was the denial of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, considered a mere symbol without substance. These heterodox movements spread mainly through France and the Low Countries, sowing confusion among the faithful. The Church responded to these doctrinal challenges with the solemn affirmation of transubstantiation at the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215. This theological definition needed to be complemented by liturgical and devotional expressions that would strengthen the people's Eucharistic faith. The elevation of the host and chalice after consecration, a practice that began to spread at this time, responded precisely to this desire to make the Eucharistic mystery more visible. Popular piety underwent a remarkable evolution, manifested in what historians call a holy hunger, a desire to see God. The faithful longed to behold the consecrated host with such fervor that they rushed from one church to another to witness the moment of elevation. The first expositions of the Blessed Sacrament and local Eucharistic processions thus arose, although there was still no specific feast dedicated exclusively to honoring this sacrament. In this context of renewal and challenges, divine providence would prepare the way for the institution of a new solemnity, responding both to the spiritual needs of the faithful and the doctrinal challenges of the time. The instrument chosen for this mission would not be a powerful theologian or an influential prelate, but a humble nun from Belgium, whose name would shine brightly in the history of Eucharistic devotion, Juliana of Montcornillon. Chapter 2. Saint Juliana of Montcornillon. Juliana was born in 1193 in Rétine, near Liège, in present-day Belgium, into a well-to-do family. She was orphaned at the age of 5 and was taken in with her sister Agnes at the convent Leprosarium of Montcornillon, run by Augustinian nuns. This early experience of loss and her direct contact with human suffering profoundly shaped her character, guiding her toward a life of active compassion and deep contemplation. From a young age, Juliana showed exceptional intelligence and an insatiable thirst for spiritual knowledge. She learned Latin with such perfection that she could read the Holy Scriptures and the writings of the Church Fathers directly, especially Saint Augustine, something unusual for a woman of her time. This intellectual formation, combined with an intense life of prayer and penance, silently prepared her to understand and transmit the divine message she would later receive. At 13, Juliana took religious vows at Montcornillon, quickly standing out for her humility, obedience, and extraordinary Eucharistic devotion. Her service to the lepers was exemplary. She saw in each sufferer the suffering face of Christ, offering them not only physical care but also spiritual comfort. She spent long hours in adoration before the Blessed Sacrament, developing a deep intimacy with the Lord, present in the Eucharist, Around 1230, Juliana's virtues and abilities led her to be elected prioress of the community, a position she accepted reluctantly but performed with wisdom. Under her leadership, the convent experienced a remarkable spiritual renewal centered on Eucharistic devotion. She was especially concerned with the formation of the nuns, personally teaching them the scriptures and Christian doctrine with an emphasis on the Eucharistic mystery. The Bishop of Liège, Robert of Tourette, soon recognized the authenticity of Juliana's holiness and the depth of her wisdom. He consulted her frequently on ecclesiastical matters, valuing her discernment. This relationship of trust would prove providential when the time came to validate the supernatural visions that Juliana would begin to receive. Visions that would change not only her life, but also the liturgical history of the Universal Church. Chapter 3. Celestial Visions. The supernatural manifestations that would mark Juliana's destiny began when she was barely 16. During her prolonged hours of prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, she began to repeatedly contemplate an enigmatic vision, the moon in its fullness, bright and resplendent, yet crossed by a dark streak that made it imperfect. This image, which recurred with increasing frequency over the years, left her initially confused and disturbed, for she could not understand its meaning. For nearly 20 years, Juliana received this mysterious vision without fully understanding it. Despite her efforts to discern its meaning through prayer and meditation, finally, in a particularly intense mystical experience, Christ himself revealed what it represented. The full moon symbolized the Church and its liturgical year, while the dark spot signified the absence of a feast specifically dedicated to honoring the Blessed Sacrament of the altar. The Lord expressed his desire that such a celebration be instituted with a threefold purpose: to strengthen the faith of believers in the real presence, to make amends for offenses against the Eucharist, and to counter the heresies that denied transubstantiation. This feast should be celebrated on the Thursday after the octave of Pentecost, or the Thursday after the Feast of the Holy Trinity, separate from the somber context of Holy Thursday, to allow for a joyful and solemn commemoration of the Eucharistic gift. In later visions, Christ revealed further details about the celebration: a solemnity with its own liturgy, a public procession with the Blessed Sacrament, and a festive octave. He revealed that he had personally chosen her to be the messenger of this divine desire, entrusting her with the mission to work for the establishment of the new feast. Juliana, aware of her personal insignificance and the immense difficulties such an undertaking would entail, felt overwhelmed and fearful. But the insistence of the visions and the clarity of the divine command left her no alternative. For years, Juliana kept the secret of these revelations, sharing them only with her confessor, Canon John of Lausanne, and a few nuns of her utmost confidence, among them Blessed Eva of Liège. This small circle helped her discern the authenticity of the visions and mature her understanding of her mission. Canon John, convinced of the authenticity of Juliana's experiences, became her main support and the first promoter of the cause before the ecclesiastical authorities, acting as an intermediary between the humble prioress and the theologians and prelates whose approval would be necessary for the establishment of the new feast. Chapter 4. First Steps in Liège. After years of prayer and discernment, Juliana finally decided to make her visions known beyond her small circle of confidants. Through Canon John of Lausanne, the message reached prominent theologians in the Liège region, including Hugo of St. Caro, provincial of the Dominicans and future cardinal, and Guillard of Lyon, chancellor of the University of Paris. These men of science, after carefully examining Juliana's visions and finding them fully in accordance with Catholic doctrine, became staunch defenders of the cause. Bishop Robert of Tourette, Liège, who already held Juliana in high esteem, received the proposal for the new feast with interest. After consulting with theologians and clergy of his diocese, and convinced of the legitimacy and pastoral opportunity of such a celebration, he issued a synodal decree in 1246, ordering that the feast of Corpus Christi be celebrated annually throughout the Diocese of Liège on the Thursday after Trinity. This decree represented the first official recognition of the feast Juliana had dreamed of, and constituted a significant triumph for the humble prioress. However, the unexpected death of Bishop Robert just weeks after promulgating the decree left the implementation in a precarious situation. The cathedral chapter, divided in its opinions on the advisability of the new feast, did not immediately apply the provisions of the deceased prelate. Furthermore, the episcopal see remained vacant for several years, a period during which ecclesiastical affairs were left in the hands of administrators less inclined to liturgical innovations. Despite these setbacks, the first official celebration of Corpus Christi took place in the Church of St. Martin in Liège in 1247, thanks mainly to the influence of Archdeacon Jacques Pantaleon, the future Pope Urban IV, and the persistent devotion of Blessed Ava, a recluse near that church. The specific liturgy for the feast, composed by Juliana herself with the help of a young canon, included biblical texts, prayers, and hymns that extolled the Eucharistic mystery with profound theology and heartfelt devotion. This first celebration, although limited to a single church and not to the entire diocese as Bishop Robert had ordained, constituted an important initial step and demonstrated the favorable reception of the faithful people towards this new expression of Eucharistic devotion. The seed sown by Juliana's visions was beginning to sprout, although it would still face numerous difficulties before blossoming fully. Meanwhile, the visionary herself was about to face one of the most painful trials of her life, which would test her fidelity to the mission she had received. Chapter 5. Opposition and Persecution. Juliana's decision to publicly promote the Feast of Corpus Christi unleashed a wave of opposition that would subject her to harsh trials. The first front of resistance arose within her own religious community. Some nuns, motivated by envy or skepticism, began to criticize her, accusing her of inventing visions to gain notoriety. This internal hostility created an atmosphere of tension in Mont-Cornillon, undermining Juliana's authority as prioress. The situation worsened when these internal tensions intertwined with local political conflicts. The civil administrator of the leper colony, Roger, a corrupt man who embezzled funds intended for the sick, saw in Juliana a threat to his illicit activities because she had reported his abuses to the competent authorities. Taking advantage of the discontent of some nuns, Roger orchestrated a smear campaign against the prioress, accusing her of exalted mysticism, disobedience, and even embezzlement, the very crime he was committing. This conspiracy culminated in 1246 with a violent attack on the convent by a mob instigated by Roger, which forced Juliana and her most faithful followers to flee precipitously. Thus began for the saint a painful period of exile and pilgrimage. She found temporary refuge in several religious houses in the region, but the persecution and slander followed her wherever she went. The death of Bishop Robert that same year represented a particularly harsh blow for Juliana. Without the protection of this prelate who had officially approved the feast, her position was considerably weakened. The episcopal see, remaining vacant for several years, left ecclesiastical affairs in the hands of administrators unfavorable to the liturgical innovations proposed by a controversial and exiled nun. Despite these adversities, Juliana never lost the conviction that the divine will would prevail. During her exile, she continued to promote Eucharistic devotion among those who received her. Her unwavering faith in the message she received and her humble perseverance impressed impartial observers, gradually gaining new allies for her cause. Among these, Archdeacon Jacques Pantaleon of Liège stood out. He personally met Juliana and became convinced of the authenticity of her visions. This seemingly casual connection would prove providential for the future of the feast of Corpus Christi, as this cleric would be elevated to the pontifical throne with the name of Urban IV. Thus, while Juliana faced persecution and rejection, God silently prepared the way for the fulfillment of his design, demonstrating once more that divine plans are accomplished even through human contradictions. Chapter 6. The Miracle of Bolsena. While devotion to Corpus Christi quietly unfolded in Liège, an extraordinary event in central Italy would give a decisive impetus to the universal institution of the feast. In the summer of 1263, a Bohemian priest named Peter of Prague was making a pilgrimage to Rome, tormented by doubts about the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Though a devout cleric, he experienced a crisis of faith specifically related to transubstantiation, possibly influenced by theological controversies questioning this dogma in various parts of Europe. During his journey, the priest stopped in the small town of Bolsena, in the Umbria region, where he requested to celebrate Holy Mass at the Church of St. Christina. At the crucial moment of consecration, as he uttered the words, "This is my body," something extraordinary happened. The host began to bleed profusely. The blood stained the corporal, the altar linens, and even the floor of the sanctuary. Deeply shaken, the priest initially tried to conceal what had happened, but the abundance of blood and his own distress made it impossible to continue the celebration normally. Interrupting the Mass, he rushed to the nearby city of Orvieto, where Pope Urban IV and the Roman Curia were residing at that time. Prostrating himself at the feet of the pontiff, the priest confessed his past doubts and recounted the miraculous event he had just witnessed. Urban IV, impressed by the account, immediately sent the Bishop of Orvieto and several theologians to Bolsena to investigate. The papal envoys confirmed the truth of the events, carefully collected the blood-stained cloths, and took them to Orvieto, where they were received by the Pope and the entire Curia in a solemn procession. This Eucharistic miracle profoundly impacted Urban IV for multiple reasons. First, it constituted a supernatural confirmation of the dogma of the real presence at a time when it was being questioned by various heresies. Furthermore, the fact that it occurred precisely when the Pope was considering universally instituting a feast dedicated to the Blessed Sacrament seemed a clear divine sign. The coincidence was extraordinarily significant. The same pontiff who, as Archdeacon of Liège, had learned of Juliana's visions and supported the local celebration of Corpus Christi, now received, as head of the Universal Church, this miraculous Eucharistic sign. The miracle of Bolsena thus came to supernaturally confirm the inspiration Juliana had received decades earlier. The impact of the miracle quickly transcended ecclesiastical circles, spreading among the faithful and reviving Eucharistic devotion. The Cathedral of Orvieto, where the relics of the miracle were preserved, became an important pilgrimage site. To properly house these treasures, the magnificent chapel of the corporal was built, decorated with frescoes depicting the miracle. Even more significant for the history of the Church was that this miracle acted as a catalyst for the papal decision to universally institute the feast of Corpus Christi, thus fulfilling, just 5 years after her death, the yearning for which St. Juliana had worked and suffered for decades. Chapter 7. Pope Urban IV. The connection between St. Juliana of Montcornillon and Pope Urban IV was a providential link in the history of Corpus Christi. Jacques Pantaleon, who would take the name Urban IV upon being elected pope, was born in Troyes, France, around 1195, into a humble family. His intellectual talent allowed him to receive an excellent education. Graduating in law from the University of Paris, His ecclesiastical career led him to hold various positions, being appointed Archdeacon of Liège in 1240, a position he held when he met Juliana. During his time in Liège, Jacques Pantaleon had the opportunity to personally appreciate Juliana's holiness and the theological soundness of her proposal. Impressed, he became a defender of her cause, supporting the implementation of the feast in the Church of Saint Martin. This direct experience with the Belgian mystic would leave an indelible mark on the future pontiff, who never forgot the spiritual authenticity and pastoral opportunity of devotion to Corpus Christi. After leaving Liège, Jacques Pantaleon's career continued to ascend. He was appointed Bishop of Verdun, then Patriarch of Jerusalem, and finally, on August 29, 1261, he was elected Pope as Urban IV. His pontificate took place during a turbulent period, marked by political conflicts and external threats. Despite these pressing temporal concerns, he never lost sight of the spiritual dimension of his ministry, and the promotion of Eucharistic devotion held a privileged place among his priorities. The miracle of Bolsena in 1263 acted as the definitive catalyst for the universal institution of the feast. On August 11, 1264, through the bull Transiturus de Hoc Mundo, Urban IV officially established the solemnity for the entire Church, setting it on the Thursday after the octave of Pentecost. In the text, he explained the theological and pastoral reasons: to strengthen faith in the real presence, to foster Eucharistic devotion, to repair offenses against the sacrament, and to counteract heresies that denied transubstantiation. Although the bull did not explicitly mention Juliana or her visions, possibly to avoid controversies, its content faithfully reflected the inspiration she had received. Urban IV included generous indulgences for those who devoutly participated in the festivity, especially in the liturgical offices and the procession, an element that Juliana had indicated as particularly important. He also commissioned St. Thomas Aquinas to compose specific liturgical texts, resulting in some of the most beautiful expressions of Eucharistic theology. Unfortunately, Urban IV died just 2 months after promulgating the bull, on October 2, 1264, without seeing the universal implementation of the feast. The ensuing political turmoil delayed the effective application of the decree. However, the seed was planted, and although the universal celebration of Corpus Christi would take decades to fully consolidate, the official act of the pontiff had crowned Juliana's dream and laid the foundation for one of the most important festivities of the Catholic liturgical calendar. Pope Urban IV's life illustrates how divine providence uses the personal experiences of its instruments to fulfill its designs. The young archdeacon, who had encountered a humble visionary in Liège, would become the pontiff who, inspired by that seed and confirmed by an extraordinary miracle, would institute a feast destined to endure through the centuries as a central expression of the Church's Eucharistic faith. Chapter 8. The Miracle of Lanciano. While not directly linked to the institution of the Feast of Corpus Christi, the Eucharistic miracle of Lanciano holds a privileged place in the history of devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, due to its extraordinary nature and its significant persistence through time. This prodigy, which occurred several centuries before St. Juliana's visions, constitutes one of the most impressive testimonies of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and has nourished the faith of countless believers throughout history. According to historical documents, the miracle occurred around the year 750 AD in the small town of Lanciano, in the Italian region of Abruzzo. A Basilian monk, celebrating Holy Mass in the Church of San Legonciano, experienced persistent doubts about the real presence of Christ in the Eucharistic species. During the consecration, as he pronounced the words instituted by Christ, he witnessed an astonishing transformation. The host visibly became living flesh, and the consecrated wine into real blood, which then coagulated into 5 irregular globules of different sizes. The monk, overwhelmed by this prodigy, announced it to the faithful present, who became the first witnesses of the miracle. The news spread rapidly through the region, attracting numerous pilgrims who wanted to contemplate the extraordinary phenomenon. The ecclesiastical authorities of the time, after carefully examining the facts, recognized the authenticity of the miracle and authorized its public veneration. What is truly exceptional about this prodigy is that, unlike other Eucharistic miracles where the transformed species eventually deteriorated, the relics of Lanciano have been preserved to this day in a surprisingly unaltered state, despite having been exposed for centuries to the air without any type of preservative or special treatment. This fact, extraordinary in itself, takes on even more astonishing dimensions in light of modern scientific studies. In 1970-71, Professor Odoardo Linoli, an eminent anatomical pathologist, conducted a thorough scientific analysis of the relics with the authorization of the Holy See. The results, later confirmed by the World Health Organization, revealed surprising facts. The flesh is authentic cardiac muscle tissue, myocardium. The blood is real human blood of type AB, the same found in the Shroud of Turin. Furthermore, the proteins in the blood have the same normal distribution as fresh blood, something scientifically inexplicable after 12 centuries. These scientific findings have given the miracle of Lanciano a special relevance in the modern era, where rationalist skepticism frequently questions supernatural phenomena. The fact that contemporary science confirms key aspects of the prodigy without being able to explain its extraordinary preservation offers powerful testimony to the reality that the Church has believed and taught for 2 millennia, that in the Eucharist, Christ is truly, really, and substantially present under the species of bread and wine. Although this miracle did not directly influence the institution of the feast of Corpus Christi, which would occur 5 centuries later, it naturally integrated into the Eucharistic devotion that the solemnity promotes. The Basilica of the Eucharistic Miracle in Lanciano has become an important pilgrimage center, especially significant during the Corpus Christi celebrations, when the relics are carried in solemn procession. Thus, this miracle, although chronologically prior and independent of St. Juliana's visions, has been incorporated into the spiritual heritage that the Feast of Corpus Christi celebrates and promotes, offering a tangible and scientifically verifiable testimony of the central truth that this solemnity commemorates the real presence of Christ in the sacrament of the altar. Chapter 9. The Liturgy of St. Thomas. St. Thomas Aquinas' contribution to the solemnity of Corpus Christi represents one of the most perfect encounters between theological genius and poetic sensibility in the history of Catholic liturgy, when Pope Urban IV decided to institute the feast for the entire Church. He needed liturgical texts that would express with doctrinal precision and spiritual beauty the Eucharistic mystery. The choice of the angelic doctor for this task could not have been more fitting. Besides being the most eminent theologian of his time, Thomas professed an extraordinary personal devotion to the Eucharist. Responding to the pontifical commission, St. Thomas composed the complete office for the solemnity, including antiphons, responsories, hymns, and prayers for the various liturgical hours, as well as texts for the Mass of the day. His work, probably done between 1263 and 1264, constitutes a true jewel that masterfully combines theological depth, poetic beauty, and devotional fervor. Following the patristic and scholastic tradition, Thomas structured his composition as a comprehensive exposition of the Eucharistic mystery. encompassing its prefigurations in the Old Testament, its institution by Christ, its theological meaning, and its spiritual fruits. Among all the compositions of the office, the hymns stand out especially, which have endured as immortal expressions of Eucharistic faith. The Pange Lingua, with its solemn Gregorian melody, exalts the institution of the sacrament and articulates with precision the doctrine of transubstantiation. Its last two stanzas, known as Tantum Ergo, became the hymn par, excellence for the blessing with the blessed sacrament. The Verbum Supernum Prodiens, sung at Lauds, culminates with the stanza O Salutaris Hostia, frequently used as an independent Eucharistic hymn. Perhaps the most sublime of these compositions is the sequence Lauda Sion Salvatorem, a masterpiece of Eucharistic theology expressed in verses of extraordinary beauty, where each stanza develops with precision some aspect of the mystery, from the reality of the real presence to the prefiguration of the celestial banquet. Some of its verses stand out for their extraordinary theological synthesis, like the one proclaiming Dogma datur Christianis, quod in carnem transit panis et vinum in sanguinem. It's dogma for Christians that bread becomes flesh and wine becomes blood. These liturgical texts were decisively instrumental in spreading and ensuring the acceptance of the feast, offering such a solid theological and devotional framework that it dispelled any doubt about the legitimacy of the new celebration. The doctrinal depth satisfied the most demanding theologians, while the poetic and musical beauty touched the hearts of the simple faithful. Moreover, the authorship of the already celebrated St. Thomas Aquinas gave the Corpus Christi liturgy a prestige and authority that facilitated its universal adoption. Through these texts, St. Thomas conveyed to future generations not only Eucharistic doctrine in its most precise formulation, but also the devotional fervor and mystical experience of the sacrament that he himself experienced. His own relationship with the Eucharist was so intimate that, as his biographers recount, he often shed tears during the celebration of Mass and spent long hours in adoration before the Blessed Sacrament. This personal union with the mystery he had so masterfully explained was reflected in every line of his Corpus Christi office. Posterity has unanimously recognized the exceptional value of this liturgical work. While other medieval compositions were modified or replaced in successive liturgical reforms, St. Thomas's texts for Corpus Christi have remained substantially unchanged over the centuries, considered unsurpassable models of sacred poetry. Even after the Second Vatican Council, which introduced significant changes to the liturgy, these hymns retain their privileged place in Eucharistic celebrations, a testament to their enduring ability to express faith and nourish the devotion of the faithful. Chapter 10. Expansion and Consolidation. Following Pope Urban IV's death, the universal implementation of the Corpus Christi feast experienced a period of slowdown due to political and ecclesiastical turbulence. However, the celebration continued to be observed in Liège and gradually spread to neighboring dioceses, mainly due to the influence of bishops who had personally known Juliana or had witnessed the fervor the feast aroused among the faithful. The definitive impetus for the universalization of Corpus Christi came with Pope Clement V, who at the Council of Vienne 1311–1312 confirmed and renewed Urban IV's bull Transiturus. This reaffirmation was later reinforced by his successor, Pope John XXIII, who in 1317 included the bull in the Clementines, part of the Corpus Juris Canonici, and actively promoted the celebration throughout the Church. From then on, the solemnity spread rapidly throughout Europe, acquiring specific characteristics in each region that reflected the diverse cultural traditions. Particularly notable was the development of Eucharistic processions, a central element of the celebration that Juliana had emphasized in her visions. These public manifestations, initially simple, evolved into spectacular displays of popular piety and liturgical magnificence. In cities like Toledo, Seville, or Cusco, the Corpus procession was transformed into an event involving the entire community. Streets were adorned with flowers and tapestries. Guilds competed in the creation of floats and decorative elements. Civil and ecclesiastical authorities participated in a solemn procession, and artistic expressions such as dances, autos sacramentales, and specialized music enriched the celebration. The 16th century, with the religious crisis provoked by the Protestant Reformation, gave the celebration of Corpus Christi a new dimension of doctrinal affirmation. Faced with the rejection of the real presence and transubstantiation by the Reformers, the Catholic Church further emphasized the solemnity, especially in its public and processional dimension, as a visible testimony of its Eucharistic faith. The Council of Trent, 1545-1563, explicitly reaffirmed the traditional doctrine on the Eucharist and fervently recommended the celebration of Corpus Christi, with special emphasis on the procession. Now considered not only a devotional act, but also a clear apologetic manifestation in a context of doctrinal controversy. The missionary expansion of the Church brought the feast of Corpus Christi to the newly evangelized territories in America, Africa, and Asia, where it acquired its own characteristics by merging with indigenous cultural elements. Particularly in Hispanic America, the celebration took deep root, developing original expressions that combined European tradition with indigenous sensibilities. Ritual dances, decorations with local motifs, the use of instruments and melodies specific to each region. This inculturation of the Eucharistic feast, far from diluting its essential meaning, enriched it with new expressive nuances, demonstrating the ability of the Eucharistic mystery to incarnate itself in the most diverse cultures without losing its fundamental identity. Chapter 11. Popular Traditions. The celebration of Corpus Christi has generated over the centuries a rich heritage of popular traditions that, adapting to diverse cultures, express the common faith in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. These manifestations, which complement the official liturgy, show how the Eucharistic mystery has permeated the social and cultural life of Christian communities. One of the most widespread traditions is the creation of floral carpets along the processional route. This custom developed especially in Spain, Italy, and Latin America, transforms the streets into ephemeral works of art, collectively created by neighbors who work throughout the night. The designs, frequently of Eucharistic or biblical inspiration, depict chalices, hosts, monstrances, or gospel scenes. The beauty of these carpets, destined to be destroyed by the passage of the procession, symbolizes the offering of human creativity to the Eucharistic Christ. Autos sacramentales, theatrical representations of Eucharistic themes, constituted another notable cultural expression, especially in the Hispanic world during the 16th and 17th centuries. These works, of which Calderón de la Barca was the greatest exponent, combined allegorical, biblical, and theological elements to make the truths about the sacrament accessible to the people. Floats, spectacular displays in public squares, part of the Corpus Christi celebrations. These elaborate creations use stunning stagecraft, music, and dance to catechize with delight, in keeping with the Baroque sensibility that aimed to impact the senses to move the spirit. Music has been another essential component of the celebrations. Beyond the liturgical hymns composed by St. Thomas Aquinas, each region developed its own repertoire of Eucharistic songs in the vernacular, many passed down orally through generations. These melodies allowed the faithful to actively participate in the processions, expressing their devotion in a more personal and immediate way than the official Latin texts. Along with vocal music, Bands, orchestras, and instrumental ensembles unique to each culture accompanied the procession, contributing to the festive and solemn atmosphere. Chapter 12. Enduring Significance. The solemnity of Corpus Christi, from its establishment in the 13th century to the present day, has held a central place in the liturgical and spiritual life of the Catholic Church. Its importance transcends the ceremonial realm, forming a privileged expression of ecclesial identity. Grounded in the Eucharistic mystery, as St. John Paul II affirmed, the Church lives from the Eucharist, and this feast visibly manifests this theological reality. Doctrinally, the celebration has served to reaffirm and deepen faith in the real presence, especially during times of theological questioning. From the medieval heresies that originally motivated the institution of the feast, through the Protestant denial of transubstantiation, to contemporary secularizing trends, Corpus Christi has constituted a solemn profession of faith in the substantial, true, and real presence of Christ under the Eucharistic species. The public procession visualizes this faith, making present Christ who walks the streets and blesses homes, just as he did during his earthly ministry. Spiritually, the feast has fostered Eucharistic devotion in its various expressions: adoration, communion, reparation, and contemplation. The practices associated with the solemnity, holy hours, visits to the Blessed Sacrament, spiritual communions, acts of reparation, have nourished the piety of countless faithful, offering channels to experience the relationship with Christ, present in the sacrament. The influence of this Eucharistic spirituality extends beyond the specific day of the feast, permeating the entire Christian life with the awareness of the Lord's constant nearness in the tabernacle. From a pastoral and missionary perspective, Corpus Christi has functioned as an instrument of evangelization and catechesis. The public procession, with its festive character and rich symbolism, constitutes a visible proclamation of the gospel in the midst of the secular city, reminding us of the transcendent dimension of human existence, especially in contexts of increasing secularization. This public manifestation of faith acquires renewed testimonial value, challenging the confinement of religion to the exclusively private sphere. The story of Corpus Christi, from the humble vision of St. Juliana to its current universal celebration, admirably illustrates how the Holy Spirit guides the Church in developing its understanding of the revealed mysteries. What began as a personal inspiration was transformed by divine design into a liturgical expression that enriches the life of the whole Church. This process, in which mystics and theologians, popes and simple faithful, extraordinary miracles and popular devotions participated, reflects the nature of the Church as a community guided by the Spirit, where each member contributes to the common good. Ultimately, the solemnity of Corpus Christi reminds us of the centrality of the Eucharistic mystery in Christian life. In an increasingly fragmented and materialistic world, this celebration invites us to recognize the transformative presence of Christ among us, not as a historical memory or an abstract symbol, but as a living and personal reality that continues to nourish His Church with the bread of life. Thus, what began with the vision of an imperfect moon perceived by a humble nun has become a resplendent Eucharistic sun that illuminates the universal Church, reminding us that, as we sing in the Tantum Ergo, faith supplies the inadequacy of the senses. Prayer to the Blessed Sacrament, Lord Jesus Christ, who in the admirable sacrament of the Eucharist left us the memorial of your passion, grant us to venerate in such a way the sacred mysteries of your body and blood, that we may constantly experience within ourselves the fruit of your redemption. You who, out of infinite love, wish to remain with us under the humble appearances of bread and wine, Enlighten our eyes of faith to recognize you always present in this sacrament. May we, following the example of Saint Juliana, adore you with sincere devotion and receive you with a pure heart. We thank you for the Eucharistic miracles like those of Bolsena and Lanciano, extraordinary signs that confirm our faith in your real presence. May these testimonies strengthen our trust when doubts darken our path. Bless your Church, which joyfully celebrates the solemnity of Corpus Christi. May this feast impel us to live more intensely the mystery of communion that the Eucharist signifies, being builders of unity in a divided world. You who live and reign forever and ever. Amen.